It was late, too late, when my friend Jenna and I left work that night. The kind of late where the world feels hollow, like everyone else has vanished and left you alone in the dark. The streets were empty, the kind of empty that makes your skin crawl as if the silence itself is watching you. I took my usual route home, a winding maze of surface streets and back roads with about 8 or 9 turns. It wasn't the fastest way, but it was familiar, and familiarity felt safe. Jenna was in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, the blue glow casting eerie shadows on her face. We were both exhausted, the kind of tired that makes everything feel surreal, like you're moving through a dream, or a nightmare. That's when we noticed the car. It was a sedan, dark-colored, black or maybe deep blue, its headlights cutting through the fog that had started to roll in. It pulled out of a side street just after we left work, and within minutes, it was clear they were taking the exact same route as us. Weird, Jenna muttered, glancing up from her phone. They're going the same way. I shrugged it off at first. Coincidences happen, right? But by the 4th turn, the unease started to creep in. The car was still there, tailing us, or were we tailing it? It was hard to tell. Okay, this is getting creepy, Jenna said, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. What are the odds? I forced a laugh, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. Maybe they think we're following them. We're probably freaking them out. Jenna snorted. Yeah, like we're some kind of stalkers. Maybe you should signal early or something. Let them know it's just a coincidence. I tried that. At the next turn, I flipped my blinker on way before the intersection, hoping the driver would see it and realize we weren't following them. But it didn't work. The car kept going, turning where we turned, stopping where we stopped. By the 6th turn, my hands were gripping the wheel too tightly, my knuckles white. Jenna was quiet now, her phone forgotten in her lap. The streets were darker here, the streetlights few and far between. The fog had thickened, swallowing the edges of the road, making the world feel smaller, tighter. This isn't funny anymore, Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I nodded, my throat dry. 2 more turns and we're home. Maybe they'll go a different way. But they didn't. The car stayed with us, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror, blinding me every time I glanced back. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a steady drumbeat of fear. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. When we were just 2 blocks from home, the car suddenly pulled over to the side of the road. I slowed down, unsure what to do. Go around them, Jenna urged, her voice tight. Just past them. I did, my hands trembling on the wheel. As we drove by, I glanced over, trying to get a look at the driver, but the windows were tinted too dark, and the fog made it impossible to see inside. The car was just a shadow, a void. We turned onto our street, a dead-end road with only a few houses. I pulled into our driveway, my hands shaking as I put the car in park. Jenna and I sat there for a moment, neither of us speaking, both of us staring at the rearview mirror. The car didn't follow us. They must have realized it was a coincidence, Jenna said, her voice shaky. Right? I nodded, but I didn't believe it. Something about the way the car had pulled over, the way it had just stopped, felt wrong, like it was waiting. We got out of the car and hurried inside, locking the door behind us. The house was dark and quiet, the way we'd left it that morning. Jenna flipped on the lights, and the sudden brightness made me blink. I'm going to bed, she said, her voice still trembling. This is too weird. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stood by the window, peering out into the foggy night. The street was empty, the car nowhere to be seen. But then I saw it. At the end of the street, just barely visible through the fog, was the silhouette of a car. It was parked, its headlights off, but I could see the faint glow of its interior light. Someone was inside. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to look away, to close the curtains and pretend I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my eyes locked on that shadowy figure. And then, slowly, the car began to move. It rolled forward, silent and smooth, like a predator stalking its prey. My heart was pounding now, my palms slick with sweat. I wanted to scream, to wake Jenna, to do something, but I couldn't move. The car stopped in front of our house. I could see it clearly now, the dark sedan, its windows still impenetrably black. The engine was off, but the interior light was on, casting a faint glow that made my stomach churn. And then the driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out, tall and thin, their features obscured by the fog and the darkness. They stood there for a moment, just staring at the house, and then they started walking toward the door. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Jenna!" I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. Jenna, get up! She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, from the couch. She'd fallen asleep. The knock on the door was soft, almost polite, but it made me jump. I backed away, my mind racing. What do I do? What do I do? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I could hear the doorknob rattling, the sound of someone trying to turn it. Jenna, I screamed, finally finding my voice. She jolted awake, her eyes wide with fear. What's wrong? There's someone at the door. The knocking stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn again, this time with more force. Jenna scrambled to her feet, her face pale. Call the police! I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone trying to break into our house, I whispered, my voice trembling. The operator started asking questions, but I couldn't focus. The doorknob was rattling violently now, and I could hear the sound of the door creaking like it was about to give way. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening. Jenna and I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Hello? The operator's voice came through the phone. Are you still there? They're gone, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I crept to the window and peered out, my heart pounding. The car was still there, parked in front of our house, but the driver's side door was closed. The figure was gone. They're gone, I repeated, more to myself than to the operator. But as I turned away from the window, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection. A face, pale and gaunt, staring back at me from the darkness outside. And then the lights went out. On a cold autumn night, the streets of our college town felt unnervingly deserted. The moon hung low, casting a faint, ghostly glow over the empty road. The hum of the old truck's engine was the only sound, a stark contrast to the eerie silence pressing in from all sides. It was just the four of us, friends on a late-night drive, aimlessly winding through town with no particular destination in mind. We weren't searching for anything specific, just the sweet release of freedom. Freedom from school, responsibilities, and the weight of everything that held us down. The kind of freedom that made you feel invincible, as though nothing could touch you. We'd driven these streets 100 times before, lost in the quiet hum of a town that never quite felt like home. But tonight was different. As we neared the outskirts, the stillness in the air deepened. There were no other cars, no lights in windows, no laughter drifting from the few bars. The town felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jake, in the driver's seat, noticed it first. His face, usually carefree and full of jokes, had gone pale. He stared ahead, his hands tightening on the wheel. Something's off, he muttered. I didn't respond, but I felt it too. A strange pressure, like the world had subtly shifted, and we no longer belonged to it. I glanced at Sarah and Anna in the back seat, both still laughing, oblivious to the change. Kyle, however, was staring out the window, his face tight with concentration, chewing on his lip in a way I couldn't quite place. Concern? Confusion? Do you guys see that? Jake's voice broke the silence. I turned just as headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Too close. Too fast. It wasn't just behind us. It was following us. And it wasn't any car I recognized. A rusted sedan, its headlights flickering erratically, like they were struggling to stay on. Are they following us? Kyle asked, his voice shaky with unease. A chill crept down my spine as the truck's engine roared louder, but no matter how fast we went, the sedan stayed right behind us, mirroring our every move. It wasn't just tailing us, it was hunting us. My heart pounded, matching the rhythm of the engine, panic rising with every passing mile. Jake, speed up, I said, trying to sound steady, but my voice cracked. Jake slammed the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching, but the sedan stayed glued to us as if it was connected by some invisible thread. We swerved down streets, took corners sharply, but it was always there, anticipating our moves. It wasn't following us, it was predicting us. Keep going, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Don't stop. We sped deeper into the darker parts of town. The streets grew emptier, colder. The silence felt suffocating, like it had become a tangible force pressing in from all sides. There was something ancient about the air, something buried in the town's history that we weren't meant to uncover. We weren't just being followed, we were being watched. Suddenly, Jake's voice cut through the tension. Shit, he hissed, his hands trembling on the wheel. What the hell is happening? The truck's engine sputtered. The headlights flickered. "Not now," Jake cursed. "Come on!" And then the truck died. We were plunged into darkness, the only light now coming from the sedan behind us, its headlights like cold, unforgiving eyes. We were trapped, immobilized. A sickening weight of dread pressed in, and my breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. This wasn't just bad luck. It was happening again, the thing that haunted our town for generations. But then, something worse happened. The sedan's headlights blinked once. Then they went out entirely. The car became a dark shape in the night, motionless. But it wasn't sitting there. No, it was waiting. The air thickened like something was stirring within the darkness. "What the hell do we do now?" Anna's voice wavered from the back seat. Before anyone could respond, a low, guttural sound filled the silence. It wasn't coming from the sedan. It was coming from the darkness around us, closer. Something dragging itself, slow and deliberate, scraping against the pavement. I dared to glance out the window. A figure moved toward us. A shadow at first, then more clearly. A man, or something that had once been a man. His skin was stretched, sickly pale, pulled taut against his bones. His eyes, when he turned toward us, I saw them, hollow, glowing faintly, empty sockets filled with a sickly light. The growl came again, deeper this time, more feral. And then a sound like broken glass scraping across stone, a hiss that vibrated through my very bones. "We need to leave, now," I whispered, my voice barely audible as panic surged through me. "Are you insane?" Sarah's voice cracked. "We can't stay here." "We don't have a choice," I said, my heart hammering. "We can't stay. We can't run. But we have to do something." Without thinking, I yanked the door open. The cold night air slammed into me, sharp and biting. We had no plan, no escape, just a frantic, instinctive need to get away. "I can't," Kyle started, but his words faltered. "This is wrong." "I know," I muttered, "but we have to go." I barely registered the rusted car parked by the side of the road, the smell of decay rising from it. But it didn't matter. The sedan was still there, its headlights still glowing faintly in the dark, an ominous, unblinking stare. I grabbed Kyle's arm, pulling him away from the truck. "We need to run." Jake's voice cut through the fog of fear. "Get in the truck, now!" I turned to run, but the figure was closer. Almost to the truck now, dragging its twisted body toward us, its feet scraping against the pavement like something ancient and rotting. "I told you to move!" I screamed. In a frantic panic, we scrambled back into the truck. Jake slammed the gas pedal, and the truck roared to life, tearing through the streets, the figure shrinking in the rearview mirror. The sedan's headlights flickered one last time before they too went dark. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of town. The truck's engine growled, echoing in the stillness, the tension finally starting to loosen in my chest. We hadn't seen the figure in the rearview mirror for a while, but the air still felt thick with something unshakable. "Jake, slow down," Anna said, her voice small. I could tell she was trying to steady herself, to bring some sense of normalcy back. "I think we're far enough." Jake didn't respond, his grip still tight on the wheel, his face a mask of focused dread. His eyes flickered to the rearview mirror one last time, and I saw his shoulders tense. He slammed on the brakes. "What the hell are you doing?" Kyle hissed from the back seat. "I saw something," Jake muttered, eyes glued to the mirror. For a long moment, the world felt like it was holding its breath. The streets were empty, no other headlights, no figures in the distance, just the quiet hum of the truck's engine, still rattling under us. "Jake, you're imagining things," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but it came out shaky. I wasn't sure if I was trying to calm him or myself. He turned to face me. His eyes were wide, desperate. "No, listen. Something's wrong. We're not alone." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The chill that had been following us since we first noticed the sedan seemed to intensify, crawling beneath my skin, pressing into my ribs. A flash of movement outside the truck caught my eye. There, in the distance, standing still at the edge of the road. It wasn't the same figure, but it was something else. Taller, thinner, with a shape that didn't make sense. It was almost like it wasn't human. It wasn't even walking, just standing there, watching us, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Jake, now!" I screamed. But before he could move, the figure stepped forward, its limbs jerking at strange angles. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, like the air around it was thick, allowing it to move in a way that defied physics. In that instant, the town, the streets, the night, everything twisted. It was as though the world around us was warping, distorting, like we were no longer in the place we knew. "Look," Kyle shouted. I turned. There, far down the road, more shapes appeared, figures, shrouded in shadows, flickering in and out of view like ghosts, closing in, coming from every direction. They weren't walking. They were drifting, moving through the air as if they belonged to a different world. The truck's engine sputtered again, and suddenly everything went silent. No hum, no sound at all, just the beating of our hearts, impossibly loud in the oppressive quiet. "That's not possible," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I told you, we shouldn't have come here," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. Then a horrible realization hit me. The fear, the pressure, the growing sense that we were being drawn deeper into something that wasn't a random chase, something more deliberate. This had always been part of the town. We had always been part of it. The town wasn't haunted by a single ghost or spirit. It was a place that fed on fear, on anxiety, on the kind of people who dared to leave the safety of their homes. The figures weren't just chasing us. They were pulling us in, pushing us towards something worse, something beyond our understanding. I turned to Jake, but his face was blank, almost hollow. "Jake, what are you?" He was gone. The seat beside me was empty. The door was wide open. And just like that, the air shifted again, growing colder, as if something ancient had woken up. I reached for the door handle, but before I could make a move, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I whipped around, heart hammering in my chest. It was Jake. His eyes were wide, but not with fear. They were vacant, almost soulless, as though he wasn't the same person anymore. The pressure in the truck grew heavier, suffocating, as though the air itself had thickened to a point where we couldn't escape. We shouldn't have. Jake whispered in a voice that wasn't his. And then, with one slow, deliberate motion, his hand reached for mine, pulling me toward him. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, the truck jerked forward, and the sound of the engine returned, but it wasn't the rumble of the truck anymore. It was something darker, deeper, like the hum of the very earth itself. Then a voice, not Jake's, but something colder, older, something that had been watching us all along, whispered into the truck, soft and deadly. And everything went black. The night had fallen quietly over Seattle, the soft drizzle making the streets glisten under the streetlights. I had just finished my shift at the office, and I was eager to head home. The city was peaceful at this hour. Fewer cars, fewer people, just the rhythmic hum of the rain and the occasional wiper swish in the distance. The streets seemed familiar, almost soothing, as I took my usual route. It was a back road, a series of twists and turns that led to my neighborhood, the kind of road that had become second nature, especially at night, when there's no one else around. I had driven this way countless times before, never really thinking twice about it. But tonight was different. It started subtly, a shadow behind me, a set of headlights I hadn't noticed until I made the first turn. I wasn't too concerned at first. Seattle is full of night drivers. But as I took the next turn, the car was still there, trailing me with unnerving precision. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence. Maybe they were heading the same way. But then I took another turn, and they followed. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The car's headlights were sharp against the wet pavement, just close enough that I could see them, but not too close to be obvious. I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach, something that wasn't quite fear, but a growing unease. Maybe they were just driving the same route. Maybe they weren't even aware they were behind me. But the turns kept coming, left, right, left again, and each time the car mirrored my moves. It stayed the same distance behind me, never speeding up or slowing down, as if it was simply waiting for me to make the next move. There was no sign of impatience, no attempt to pass, just a steady, deliberate follow. I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. This wasn't a horror movie. This was just a coincidence. But the farther I drove, the more the unease gnawed at me. The rain began to pour harder, blurring the headlights in the rearview mirror, making it harder to see. But I could still feel the presence behind me, lurking just out of view. It was like being watched, only you couldn't see the eyes. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was just another driver, another soul taking the same route in the quiet of the night. But something about the way the car mirrored my movements felt deliberate. I could no longer chalk it up to coincidence. I reached the final stretch of my drive, just a couple of blocks from home. The dead-end street I lived on was just around the corner. This was where the car would finally pull off, I told myself. Surely this was the last intersection. But when I made the turn, the car followed. My chest tightened. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a way to break the pattern, to shake them off. I accelerated slightly, taking the corner faster than usual, hoping they'd take the hint and speed ahead. But no, the car stayed behind me, just as steady, just as close. My thoughts were swirling now, my instincts kicking in. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a cold sweat forming on my palms. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop being paranoid, but the growing sense of dread told me something wasn't right. I reached my driveway, but the car didn't break off. It didn't make the turn to continue down the main street. It didn't even slow down. It just pulled off to the side, right behind me. My throat went dry. I didn't know what to do. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to gather the courage to look at the car behind me. Was this some twisted joke? Some mistake? Should I get out and confront them? Or was I just overthinking the whole thing? But as I stared at the dim headlights through my rearview mirror, I saw something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. The car wasn't moving. It wasn't pulling away. It wasn't turning around. It was just sitting there. For a moment, I sat frozen in my car, staring at the headlights as if I could somehow make sense of it. Time seemed to stretch out, every second feeling longer than the last. My pulse hammered in my ears. Finally, my mind made up for me. I wasn't about to get out and confront a stranger in the middle of the night. I wasn't going to take the risk. I had to get inside, and I had to do it fast. I grabbed my bag and quickly unbuckled my seatbelt, stepping out of the car as quietly as I could. My eyes never left the rearview mirror. The car was still there, headlights shining in the darkness, unmoving. It almost felt like it was waiting for me to make the next move. I walked briskly toward my front door, not looking back. My body was tense, my mind racing. I could feel every step pounding in my chest. I fumbled with my keys as I reached the door, the sound of the rain hitting the roof a distant blur to the chaotic thoughts running through my mind. The door slammed shut behind me, and I immediately locked it, the click echoing in the silence. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breath. For a moment I just stood there in the dark, listening, waiting. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but after a few minutes I forced myself to peek through the curtains. My heart lurched in my chest as I peered out the window. The car was still there, but now it was moving. It slowly rolled down the street, its headlights flickering faintly in the distance. It didn't speed up or slow down. It just drove away, its silhouette disappearing into the rain-soaked night. I let out a shaky breath, the tension that had gripped me finally easing. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled away from the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But the fear still lingered. The car had followed me for far too long, and the strange stillness of it all, sitting behind me, waiting as if something had been expected, gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I wasn't sure if the driver had been some kind of prankster or if there was something darker at play, but I had a sense of foreboding, a sense that I hadn't seen the last of them. Still, at least for tonight, I was safe. I shut the curtains, locked the door again, and sat on the couch, my mind spinning. The rain still poured outside, and the city, still bathed in darkness, seemed far quieter now, as if holding its breath. But I didn't dare leave my house again that night, not until morning, and even then I wasn't so sure it would be over.